Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. Don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's AppliedEnergeticsInstitute.com. So in this hour, we're going to be speaking with Edmund Gomez about the cattle mutilation enigma. And we've never talked about cattle mutilation, and so this is going to be kind of a learning experience for me and many of you, or it could be a learning experience for you. But let me tell you a little bit about Edmund and get him on the air. For Edmund Gomez, the Dulce mystery began in June 1976 when he discovered mutilated cattle on his ranch near Dulce, New Mexico. Although stating his belief that government disinformation is behind claims of extraterrestrial involvement in the cattle mutilations and finding physical evidence of classified military activities on his land, Gomez nevertheless is intrigued by an airbed he located in the Archuletta Mesa during a 1988 expedition in the area. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio, Edmund Gomez. Hey, Edmund, how are you?
I'm doing great, Dr. Rita.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it.
And Edmund, we're going to get to meet each other next week at the ASPE Paranormal Symposium, which is going to be fun because you're going to be speaking on the topic of cattle mutilation there as well. So I guess we're just going to give people like a little glimpse of what you might be talking about at the symposium.
Great.
Okay. And again, that's next weekend, the 25th through 30th in Taos, New Mexico, ASPEsymposium.com. You can hang out with me and Edmund. It couldn't be more fun than that, don't you think?
That's for sure.
So today we're going to be talking about cattle mutilations. And from your perspective, it doesn't sound like you were going out with the intention of becoming a cattle mutilation expert. I mean, you're not a journalist. You're not a book writer. You're just a guy who worked on a ranch, who owned a ranch. How did this whole thing start?
Well, just to give you some background, my family homesteaded the Dulce area in the 1800s, the mid-1800s, and we ranched in that area ever since. And we had never really experienced anything out of the ordinary. And on that June 13th, I can remember it very, very vividly. It was a Sunday morning. My father and I and my brother and my sister went out to the ranch to check on the cattle, and we came up on this cow that had died. And of course, you know, the first thing you do is you come up to them and check to see what caused the death, and check the ear tags, check the mouth, see how old the animal is, and try to find out what actually is going on. And when we approached the animal, we noticed that there were no scavengers in the area, and usually you'll have birds, magpies or crows, immediately, feeding on the the soft fleshy tissues of recently deceased animal, and we didn't see any of that activity. And as we approached the animal, we noticed that the rectum had been cored out, and the udder had also been removed, and very precisely. But what was very, very suspicious was that the animal was still warm. And so we turned and looked at each other, and we had never experienced cattle mutilation on the ranch, and we had heard about them happening in southern Colorado, but had never really experienced one. So my dad went around the cow, and just to make sure that we didn't leave any too many tracks or disturb what we considered the crime scene. I mean, when you lose an animal, and at that time, these animals were worth $500 to $600. Now they're worth well over $1,000. But of course, being 35 years ago, that was still a lot of money. And so he went and checked the mouth, found out she was a 4-year-old cow, and had a calf, but we didn't find the calf around her. So we came back into town to notify the authorities, and being a Sunday, couldn't get a hold of the state police. He was out on patrol, and so was the brand inspector. So finally that evening they called back and they said, sure, we'll be out there first light tomorrow morning, on Monday morning. So we went out to the ranch for 5 o'clock the next morning, and to our amazement, apparently when we came up on the animal was being mutilated by whatever, and we caught him in the act, did see him. They left, came back after we left on Sunday and finished the mutilation. And the reason we know that is because when my father checked the mouth, for the teeth to see how old the animal was, the lower lip was still there. And when he checked the ear tag was still there on the ear, and they were both missing. And so then we
So they did a second harvest on the same cow?
Yes. Mm-hmm. They came back and took the parts that they were after. Okay. So then we also noticed that on our tire tracks where we drove up to the cow, there were some imprints of some type of a small vehicle, and upon further inspection, we found that it was some type of a tripod vehicle that had spacings in a tripod sequence, and with little suction cups about 4 inches in diameter. And I would imagine it probably just kind of, moved like a water wheel. And we followed it back, and some type of craft had landed about, I would say about 75 yards from where the animal was dead, and had dehydrated the grass like if it had been extremely hot, but it didn't set it on fire. And also on that spot, there was also 3 large tripods measuring about 22 inches in diameter each, and about 21 and 22 feet distance from each other. And, of course, all of a sudden we were very, very interested. Okay, what in the world is going on here? Why, whatever came, landed. So then they went after the animal. So after further inspection, we found that the animal had been chased about 300 yards. She fell 3 times. The last time she fell was where they mutilated her. At that point, state police called in some other scientists with specialized equipment, and they checked the background radiation and radiation on the cow and so forth, and they found that the radiation on the cow was twice the background level. So that was interesting. They also found a yellow oily substance on the trail leading from the cow to the craft, and the samples were taken and they were sent to Los Alamos National Laboratory, and also to the State Police Crime Lab for analysis, and they disappeared. And so we never found out what what it was. But a preliminary report that we had heard, and of course we never saw anything in writing, stated that it was silicone-based. So why silicone-based, I could not tell you. I don't know if I know silicone is. I've never heard of silicone being used as a preservative. When you're taking lab samples, usually would put it in alcohol or formaldehyde or something of that nature back in those days. So I don't know why silicone was used. So anyway, that was the very first one, and that was probably very well publicized event. This was the first time anyone had really looked at, had really analyzed, the crime scene, and was trying to determine what caused it. And a couple of years later, they continued.
Let me ask a question. Let's kind of stop here for a second.
Sure.
You mentioned that there had been some incidences in Colorado. Did the people in Colorado think that it was some kind of a poacher or wolves or mountain lions that were getting their cows, or did they wonder if there was something else going on as well?
Well, see, the thing is that, when you've been in the ranching business for forever, and so have your relatives, your ancestors, your parents, your grandparents, and so forth, you learn to know the difference between a predator kill and other natural death. And when an animal dies, scavengers will come in and feed off of the soft, fleshy parts. Basically the same parts that were missing. But when scavengers or even predators kill, they tear at the flesh with their teeth, and these were not teeth marks. These were very, very precisely cut. Looked like they'd been cut with a laser. To be honest with you, no blood, and there was no scavenger activity in the area, and that's strange because when you do have a predator kill, let's say a mountain lion will kill a calf or even a cow. They can't consume the entire animal at once, so what they'll do is they'll come and they'll bury it, but you'll have scavengers, locating it and feeding off of it, coyotes and of course you'll find, the scavenger birds. That's how you can usually find, a dead carcass is by following the birds. And these animals weren't in the area. For some reason, they avoided. The dead animal. The only thing that we did notice in great numbers were flies, and of course, the larvae from the flies basically broke down the animal, pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
So
where it was, I'm going to say lasered, was all the tissue like cauterized?
Yes,
cauterized?
It was. It was very, very precise. We took samples and the analysis on those samples came back that this was done with an instrument that cut sharper than a sharp knife. So, the cuts were very, very precise.
And this was in the 70s, correct?
Right. This was in 1976. And
so really before laser kind of stuff really was out there and available.
Well, it was first started. I know that that there was experimental laser used at Los Alamos and Sandia National Laboratories, but I don't know what what size of lasers they were using. But I know that the technology we had the technology at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not. It wasn't as commonly used as it is now. But it was available at that time.
Okay, so then you said, the next thing that happened or the next day, and I'm just going to let you go on with the story.
Okay.
If you remember where you left off.
Sure. Well, it was investigated. It took probably about a week to have the animal investigated, and of course the news media went crazy over it, and people started finding mutilated cattle in other parts of northern New Mexico and southern Colorado within that year, 76, and continuing through 77. And we didn't have any cattle mutilated in 1977. They left us alone for a year. But starting again in June of 1978, they continued. And I think we had 3 or 4 in the spring of 1978. And at that point, I started thinking, well, why in the world were they just taking our cattle and not our neighbors' cattle? And, we lived our ranch bordered the Hickory Apache Indian Reservation, close to Dulce, and reservation cattle on the other side of the fence were not mutilated, but only ours on our side of the fence. And I started thinking, well, I mean, if these are aliens, or if these are cults, because I mean, the finger is getting pointed at everything, from extraterrestrials to satanic worshipers to whoever, and they didn't know. We didn't know exactly who was doing it, but we were trying to find enough evidence to identify whatever it was that was doing it. But why in the world were they just taking our cattle and not the neighbor's cattle? And then the other thing is that when you run livestock, you purchase cattle, and a lot of times you change genetics, either by purchasing bulls or purchasing heifers, to develop your breeding program. And all the cattle that we had purchased that were not born and raised on the ranch were also left alone. So we were going, how in the world do these, whatever it was that was harvesting these animals, why were they just picking on our livestock? So I was talking to...
You had happy cows.
I guess
and they didn't even come from California.
Well, I think they were happy not to be in California, to be honest with you. But anyway, that's another story. But anyway, Dr. Howard Burgess, who was a retired scientist from Sandia Laboratories, was working with us on investigating, the mutilations. And as we were talking, he says, "You know what?" He says, "I think you're onto something." And I had mentioned to him that I remember when I was in college, when you went to the bookstore, you couldn't find a written price on a book, but you put it under a black light and under fluorescent markings, you would find the price, and that's how they could keep track of the prices on the books. And I said, "Do you think maybe there's something to that effect? That they may be marked, and they're coming back, and maybe they're just looking for cattle that were born here at the ranch?" And he says, "It's a good idea. Let's run a test." So on July 5th of 1978, we ran most of the cattle at night through the squeeze chutes and under different frequencies of lights. And under the ultraviolet light, we found that over 90% of our livestock were marked with fluorescent type paint, all the way from 3-month-old calves, to mature cows. And from that point on, we found that every cow that we found mutilated, not just on our ranch, but the neighbors' ranches, that in northern New Mexico, not necessarily the ones right next to us, but any other ranch that that had mutilated cattle that we investigated, their mutilated cattle were also marked with the fluorescent paint. So whatever was mutilating the cattle was basically keeping an eye on these cattle and only harvesting those that they had marked. And it seemed to me like they were monitoring for some reason. Why would you mark cattle and then just take those cattle? And so we made, of course, it leaks out to the news media and so forth, and they made it seem like we were doing these, experiments in the middle of the night and so forth. How the news media takes over with it, and they even had pictures of aliens watching us as we were running the cattle through the squeeze chute with different lights and those type of things. So credibility goes down the tubes. When you're actually trying to to find out what's going on with your livestock. And so anyway, that was a breakthrough. Sure.
Let me ask a question about the marks. Was it like a brand, a fluorescent brand, or was it just, paint kind of thrown on the cow? I mean, was there any symbol or anything with these marks?
No, it was random. It was like if someone had shot them with a paintball, Some were, some of the marks were on the brisket. Most of them were on the shoulders or on the back. So, whoever marked them probably came in, either flew in a chopper and was shooting them with some type of a paintball device, paintball gun. So anyway, that's what we found there, and the mutilations continued, and started thinking, well, at first you started thinking, well, maybe it was aliens, or maybe it was satanic cults, or maybe it was whatever. But then things started changing, and started thinking, well, maybe it's someone else. Maybe the government's doing some experimentation on chemical biological warfare research, and they've been following our herds because our ranch had been there for well over 100 years, and the genetics on these livestock were basically traced back to that time period. And so if they were wanting to monitor something, they would. Also, you think about it, and you're going, well, when they were experimenting and developing the atomic bomb at Los Alamos, what were they doing with their waste products? And second and third hand, you heard rumors that the government was flying over the mountains of northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, dumping their garbage, and maybe what they were doing was monitoring for these waste products and seeing how it was affecting livestock. And when you started looking at the different parts of the animal that they were harvesting, those would be the logical parts of the animal that I would look for if I was a scientist to monitor, because when they take the tongue and the lower lip, that's when the cow is grazing, that's how she eats. She grabs the hay, the grass, and circles it with her tongue, brings it into her mouth, and then uses her teeth to slice it off, and then swallows it. And then the high concentration of the feed goes through her system, and of course it's going to, what goes in has to come out if it's not absorbed. So the rectum would be the next place to look. And then if she's a lactating cow, well, of course, high concentrations of whatever she was eating would be in the milk. So that would you would say, well, okay, the udder would be a logical organ to harvest, to look for whatever they were looking, high concentrations of whatever heavy metals or whatever they were looking for, and then also the reproductive organs, which were also harvested along with when we poured out the rectum. You would find chromosomal damage, basically in the haploid stage there with the gonad. So it all made sense to me personally, and that if it was an entity that was looking at monitoring whatever they were taking, it was a logical thing to take. So
I think it's important for the listeners to realize, I know a little bit about ranching, and just don't laugh at me at the way that I say this, but on a ranch, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, most of the cows that are there are girl cows, not boy cows, and so they're only taking out girl cow parts, not boy cow parts, because there aren't that many boy cows.
Yes and no. We had two bulls that were also mutilated, and these were bulls that were raised at the ranch. We were breeding some Charolais calves back in the day when the Charolais breed started getting popular. We were doing some artificial insemination breeding, and we had a couple of young bulls that were about a year old, and both of them were mutilated, probably about 200-300 yards behind the ranch house there in Dulce. So no, it wasn't just the cows that they were after. They were going after both the cows and the bulls. And we also had a yearling filly that was also mutilated. And with that filly, it was the strangest thing I had ever seen, because they also took all the tissue from the left side of her head all the way down, and also removing the brain and the pituitary glands. But it just seemed like, like they had, I don't know how they did it, but They were able to go all the way down onto the bone and remove all the tissue from the bone and all the soft tissue, the muscle, the hide, and everything, and just peeled it off.
That's weird.
That was the only horse that we had that was mutilated, and of course the first mutilation was a horse in Colorado, close to Alamosa. So,
about how many cows do you think? And I'm just going to speak, to your ranch, but then if you want to give a more general number, you lost over the period of time that this was all going on.
Well, we lost from 1976 to 1984, and in 1984 is when we sold the cattle. But between that time period, we lost 17 mother cows and their calves. Never found the calves, dead or alive. 2 bulls and that filly.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And a Doberman pinscher that disappeared when the bulls were mutilated that week. Bulls were mutilated 2 nights apart.
And then we also, overall... Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And the kind of the overall number on the different ranches, do you happen to know over that period of time about how many total were mutilated?
That's a good question. I know that there were several researchers that were plotting out, back in the 70s and early 80s, whenever a mutilation occurred, they would put a pin on a map. And at that time, there was probably 400 or 500 in southern Colorado and New Mexico. But you also have to realize that they were going on all over the country, from Wyoming, Montana, Nebraska, and in the South also. And we heard also that there were mutilations in South America and even in Europe. But I don't know if they were the same type. Since I didn't investigate them, I couldn't tell you. But and they continue. I know that I helped the late Officer Gabe Valdez investigate cattle mutilations here in northern New Mexico up until about 5 or 6 years ago, up in the Taos area, the Clayton and Trinidad area. So they were continuing. So I would imagine not less than 2,000. I would imagine.
Wow. And so they're still going on?
They're still going on. I heard a story, and I don't know how accurate it was, that 15 to 17 horses were mutilated in England about 2 months ago. But I don't know what parts they were taking there.
Okay, now I have a little twisty thing, because it sounded like you were kind of poo-pooing the UFO thing. So if it's not aliens coming and doing this, and you intimated that it was the government doing it, but why would we have the same thing happening in South America or England? I mean, obviously that's not confirmed, but why would it be so widespread all over the world?
Good question. I can't answer that. I couldn't answer that. I can only say what I have seen and what I have found, and I think if we have the technology to do it here, we may be doing the same thing in other countries that we've done the same thing. Whatever they're looking for. I don't know what they're looking for, what they're monitoring. But let me give you an example of why I think it's the government. Soon after we did, we checked for the cattle experiment, the ultraviolet experiment. Within months after, our homes were being broken into, and we were finding electronic listening devices, bugs, in our homes. So if it was aliens, why would the aliens want to know what we were up to and what we were saying? And also during that time period between 1978 and 1979, there was a 40% conception rate amongst cattle in all of northern New Mexico. So, we took a 60% loss on calves. And during that same time period, there was a 500% increase in female gynecological problems on the Jicarilla Reservation and also in several communities in northern New Mexico. And we started seeing real high numbers of cancer in the region.
And that's in people, not cows.
That's in people. That's correct.
That's interesting.
And then because these mutilations continued, my father met with Senator Harrison Schmidt and was requesting that the government do something about this. And on April 20th, 1979, we had a big meeting in Albuquerque, and at that point, they brought in the district attorney in Santa Fe, and the district attorney was charged to hire someone to investigate the cattle mutilations. And during the year between 1979 and 1980, while the investigation was going on, there was not one cattle mutilation in all of northern New Mexico or southern Colorado. And the investigator that they hired was an ex-FBI agent that had no clue what he was doing as far as working with cattle. He was from New York City. His expertise was gun running, and didn't know which end cow ate and which end the cow pooped. So, and he never did come to the ranch and never did ask us, to question us as to, what kind of information we may have had. In fact, we keep telling folks we're still waiting for him to come and investigate. But anyway, he came out with the theory that it was the animals were dying from natural causes, and that scavengers were feeding on the animals, and that we didn't know the difference between scavenger feeding on the animals and the parts being harvested. So, but almost immediately after his report came out, we started the mutilations again. And at that point, I remember very, very, very well, and it was in June of 1981, we had 3 more mutilations, and we were out having a picnic out at the ranch one Sunday afternoon, and my youngest brother came back with this tuft of aluminum. It looked like the icicles, that you put on a Christmas tree. And came back with it, and my dad says, "Well, where did you find that?" And he says, "Oh, it's scattered all over here." So we went out and looked at it, and sure enough, it was scattered all over. So we took samples and took pictures of it and had it analyzed, and turned out to be radar shaft. And we also found the number and all that. And we get a call from the Air Force and asking us where we had found it, because this stuff was top secret. And we're going, well, yeah, it was spread right over the ranch, right over an area where we had 3 cattle mutilations. And in Colorado, they found a calf with that radar shaft in the mouth. So, go figure. Then we found other things that led directly back to the Air Force. Found a high altitude temperature pressure sensor transformer at the ranch. We have no idea why they were monitoring air samples and chemical biological samples there at the ranch. Go figure. And in 1982, about 50 yards from where we had a mutilation in 1980, 81, I found a gas mask. So, everything
was an alien gas mask.
Sure, an alien gas mask.
Yeah.
And,
that's just so weird. I mean, because you said earlier that you saw like these tripod marks and, singed grass or dried up grass. Mm-hmm. Is it your opinion now that the government was trying to cover up their involvement by making it look like a UFO thing?
No, most definitely. Most definitely. Let me give you my reasons. When Officer Gabe Valdez and I were out investigating, we would spend nights, just just keeping an eye on the livestock and running back and forth. One night we spotted what we called a UFO. We couldn't identify what it was. It was a ball of light that was moving very, very slow. Couldn't hear anything, and we were looking at it through binoculars. And he calls in to Colorado to have it picked up on radar. And at the moment that they started scanning in that region, I saw the cockpit lights go on and the outside lights go off, and it was a chopper, but it had lights all the way around it on the outside, making it look like it was some type of a circular object, but it was a chopper, and you could just barely hear it. It was it didn't have very much noise, but you could still barely hear it, but it was a chopper. So I personally think that what they were doing is they were marking, these choppers coming in, and at first mutilating the animals, where they found them. But later on, we noticed that they were moving the animals and putting a device on them, a chain or a strap on the legs, and then hauling them off and mutilating them, and then bringing them back and dropping them. And the reason I'm saying dropping them is because there were no tracks leading to where they were dropped. Their bones were broken, back bones and leg bones. In fact, in Colorado, they found a calf on top of, a cow on top of a tree, and I guess they misjudged when they dropped it. But we started finding these animals, that they were moving them and coming back with them. And a lot of people will say, well, why did they come back with them? And I think it was just, a tactic that they were using, an intimidation tactic they were using to scare us. And saying, there's nothing you can do about this. We're going to do whatever we want. Other folks would say, well, why don't they just purchase them from the ranchers or purchase them at the sales barn? Well, when you start doing that, you start thinking about, okay, you're starting to leave a paper trail. So, those are the kind of things that made me think, that it was the government or some entity within the government, and I'm not saying it might be ours or wherever it might be, but it's, in my opinion, it has something to do with the Air Force, and because everything leads back, to them.
Oh, there you are. Have any other ranchers had sightings like yours of either like glowing balls floating around or choppers in and around their properties?
Oh, most definitely. There's, you see a lot of written material on these black choppers, unmarked choppers that they see before and after cattle mutilations, and no one knows where they come from or where they're going. In the Dulce area, almost on any given night, you see strange lights moving around, and of course, that's another story. But you get into to the alleged Dulce base that's supposedly under Mount Archuletta. And,
is that the one where they say that there's like this big garage door that looks like the side of the mountain?
That story
I don't know what to call it. Well, the hangar door just blends into the side of the mountain. All right, garage door, hangar door.
Sure. Mm-hmm. No, I know
it's
what you're saying. I'm just playing here because I spent a lot of time on that mountain looking for evidence. I worked very closely with Paul Benowitz, who was a scientist out of Albuquerque. He did a lot of work with sensors and did a lot of contract work with Sandia and Kirtland Air Force Base. And Paul is the one that pretty much started the the theory that there was an underground base there close to Dulce, and he was led to believe that aliens were at this base, and somehow or another the American government had a joint base there with the aliens, and they were doing all this crazy research, biological research with, basically creating new entities, and that they were using the cattle parts to make to clone, I guess, these half alien, half bovine species, and then all the human abductions that you heard. They were talking about women being abducted, and the ovaries had been removed, and they were basically developing hybrids between humans and aliens and other weird things. And those are the kind of things that took off. And you can do a search for Dulce Base and get about a million hits on it, with that. But what's true and what's not true, I don't know. All I can tell you is that I spent a lot of time with Paul going over a lot of his maps and pictures, and I spent a lot of time up on the mountain working with his chief of police at the time, Raleigh Tafoya, and we did find some things which led us to believe that something was going on up there back in, I would imagine, in the 50s and 60s, and if there's anything up there, it's underground. But I don't think that there's traffic going in and out unless it's air traffic. We have seen aircraft going into the sides of the mountains, and the terrain is so rough in there that it's almost impossible to hike in and hike out. Like you were saying, these garage doors that would open and close. I've never seen them, but I have seen aircraft flying into these canyons and not coming out. So there's something actually there. I did find what I think is a ventilation shaft. It was a 1 foot by about 8 foot cut in solid sandstone that went down probably several hundred feet, and you could feel that cold air coming up. And to find something like that that was cut straight down, in sandstone, that would not be natural, especially how the geology of that mountain is. You wouldn't see it, I could see, sandstone breaking, but not, vertically. I could see it horizontally,
and not square.
And not square.
And not
square.
Rectangular,
actually. And
yeah.
so, those are things. And then I did find some other, artifacts related to military, but it was, I would probably, like I said, 50s and 60s, and I would imagine that's probably when they were building it, if they were building it. Now, you have to think also, during the Cold War, we had to find some way of evacuating our scientists from Los Alamos, from Kirtland, from Sandia, and we had several other installations. We had NORAD up in Colorado, which is not too far from here. And we've had the technology of drilling tunnels since the 1940s. So I don't see it, being a possibility that we don't have a tunnel system leading out of Los Alamos to a strategic location in other areas that would not be targets if we did have, an atomic war, and be able to shuttle, these folks out into another area. And I'm thinking Dulce may be a place, maybe a hub, maybe an underground facility. I don't know. I know in other parts of the country we're starting to disclose some of these facilities that they've had, and I don't see it, the possibility that there could be one up in Dulce because it's so secluded in that area. And then, of course, it's under Indian reservation on both the Southern Ute in Colorado and Hickory Apache in the north, and then you have Bureau of Land Management on the east side, and on the west side you've got the Carson National Forest. So, you do have a lot of federal land and Indian land which could hide a facility like this, and if it's underground, well, it's not causing any problems. So that's my take on it.
Since you have started coming forward with your observations and thoughts and investigations, have you had any weird things happen? I mean, you mentioned you found the bugs in your house, but any other weird things? I don't often have people that, I'm going to kind of put you in that little conspiracy theory category. Someone in the chat room goes, boy, this is right out of X-Files. But have you had any, like Men in Black come and visit you or any weird stuff like that happen?
Not recently, but back in the
like that,
1980s.
Not recently.
No, not recently. Back in the 1980s, and I'm going to tell you a story here that I probably haven't shared with too many people, but right before we sold the cattle in 1984, it got to the point to where we were getting break-ins at the house almost on a regular basis. Almost every time we left the house, someone would go in. They wouldn't steal valuables, but they would go through our pictures relating to this case and steal pictures. They would steal my journal. I had a day-to-day journal that I kept, which was stolen. And one day I noticed that they had stolen an old pair of tennis shoes, a T-shirt, a pair of jeans, and a butcher knife. And I got on the telephone that day, and I called several of my colleagues across the country, and I said, folks, this is it. I'm hanging it up. I'm not going to do any more research. And that was the end of that. And we sold the cattle, and I moved on to another career. And my parents still run part of the ranch. Dad still has the homestead there in Dulce, but he does not grant interviews. He doesn't want to have anything to do with any of this. I wanted to stay on the ranch and purchase the ranch for my from my relatives, from my uncles and aunts after my grandfather passed away. And because of the situation, all the losses that we took, I couldn't do it. So I, land that had been in the family for, over 150 years was lost. And I had to change careers. So it totally took me out of my, my lifestyle and what I wanted to do. And it pretty much devastated us for a while. I mean, when you lose a ranch like that, it's like you lost your parents.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, you're not the same person that you were before. But, here we are 35 years later. A lot of the researchers are passing away. My good friend Gabe Valdez passed away this past August. And Paul Benowitz is gone. Howard Burgess is gone, and several other of the scientists that were involved in the research. And I'm thinking if the story isn't said, it's going to get lost, and people won't know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be lost. And the other part of it is that in the position that I'm in now, I have to be very credible in what I do because I do work with farmers and ranchers still. And my credibility is basically, what keeps me going. And I'm nearing retirement. So, as soon as I retire, I probably will get the book out and let people know that, what our experiences were.
And they're quite the experiences. As I said at the beginning of the show, this isn't something that you looked to do. This isn't something that you sought out. This isn't something you decided to investigate initially. This is just was part of your life experience, which is very bizarre.
It is. It is. You know, when you're growing up in a small community, you know, you see. I used to read a lot, and I was just intrigued as to what the world looked like outside of, you know, the little community of Dulce. And who was to know, you know, that we would, you know, go into a situation where it was going to be a cloak and dagger situation, you know, for many years, and things would change. Your life was going to change, and we still don't know why. You know, I'm just hoping that one day, you know, this we'll know the answers to, you know, to these secrets.
Good luck on that one. How does the rest of your family deal with this? Have they just kind of closed the door and don't want to participate, or do they have similar feelings to you? Do they think it's UFOs? Where do they kind of sit in this whole thing?
No, I think they all, you know, kind of feel the same way I do. You know, with all the evidence that we found, and especially the intimidation tactics. And I'm just telling you, just a very, very small bit of what we went through. My mother went through hell because she was singled out and intimidated. You know, I call them the cowards because they were picking on those that were the weakest and intimidating them. But they don't want to have anything to do with anything anymore. They don't want to talk about it. Of course, my siblings were too young to understand what was going on at the time, and they were off in school. And since I came back, you know, to help my father with the ranch, you know, I took the brunt of it. And at this point, I've got, you know, several nephews and nieces that are very interested in these stories, and I think we owe it to them, you know, as being part of the family history, that this is what you know, what their relatives went through, and not just them, but everyone else that took these losses.
Well, and without really understanding why it was happening or who was doing it, but I think more importantly, why it was happening, it doesn't mean that this phenomena or enigma is done. You know, I mean, you said that it's still happening at, you know, a little bit, but it doesn't mean that it won't spring up as something going on in a different country, or as you suggested, there was the radioactive issue thing going on, or the thought of, you know, where they're doing similar testing somewhere else, and now all of a sudden they're having these rashes of cattle mutilations.
Mm-hmm. Or, you know, the other thing is that maybe the technology is changed. In 35 years, can you imagine technology they were using then as compared to what we have today? Maybe they don't need to be mutilating cattle anymore to be able to continue monitoring what they're doing.
Well, it just, you know, what just came to my mind, you know, there's the chupacabra. I like saying that word, chupacabra. You know, but I mean, it's not the same thing, but it's kind of a weird, similar thing where there is this, you know, they have an animal, they have the chupacabra, but it's going in the middle of the night and sucking the blood out of animals. And
well, you know, I have yet to see a chupacabra take down a mature cow or a mature bull. Most of the stories that I've heard associated with chupacabras are chickens, small goats, kid goats, or goats that may be tied down. And I don't think a chupacabra would be responsible for this. I mean, you know, you talk to some folks, and I'm
not saying responsible for it. I'm saying that it might be the government saying it's a chupacabra going and collecting data from these other animals. Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Okay. Yes. Well, you know,
they have better technology.
Possible. Sure. Very possible, and that's exactly how the government works. You know, they like to intimidate people, and they like to to make people feel, and they play off of our weaknesses. And I always say that in Dulce we have a very very religious, very how can I say it? So at points very superstitious group, with indigenous folks and Hispanic folks that live there, and I think they just play off of us.
Edmund, there's the music, and I was having so much fun. I looked at the time and went, I will see you next week. You're cool.
Looking forward to it.
We'll have to have you back and continue this story because this was fun.
Okay. I look forward to it, and it's been an honor being on your program.
All right. Thank you. All right. That's Edmund Gomez talking about cattle mutilation. And then next week, we're having a fun guest. We're having Aaron Houdini, the last living Houdini, talking about his great-granduncle, Harry Houdini. And the second hour, Jim Harold, he's going to be sharing for us for Halloween ghost stories. So till next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com for more show information and to contact Dr. Rita. Until next time, remember, it's all just energy.